Yo, how's it going, everyone? This is Mitchell Mander here, and welcome to another review of the Pokemon Journey series. We're going to be covering episode 68 in today's review. It involves Ash reunited with his old Pokemon at Professor Oak's lab, along with the return of Gary Oak for the first time in a long time. So how was this episode overall? Well, before I get into the review, I just want to say if you're new to the channel and you like this type of content, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. It'd be pretty cool if you did that. Anyways, onto the review. So the episode begins with Ash and Go arriving at Professor Oak's lab. It would seem that the reason why Ash and Go are here is because they're actually here to deliver some research and data that Professor Sakuragi has prepared for Professor Oak. Obviously Ash can go visit his Pokemon, but it seems like the main reason that they're here is for that reason. Which, is pretty irrelevant to the rest of the episode. But anyways, this is actually Go's second visit to the lab. As he explains to Ash, I was actually here when I was 6 years old as part of Professor Oak's summer camp. And I got bored and I went off and wandered off, and that's when I discovered Mew, and that's how I got my whole goal. It's because a certain somebody was late to the summer camp and probably overslept, which we know that certain somebody was Ash. And even Professor Oak actually acknowledges that, which I thought was pretty funny. But anyways, yeah, Go got his goal essentially thanks to Ash. And Go explains his goal to Professor Oak, which Professor Oak actually mentions Project Mew, and thinks that Go would be interested in it, but Go actually ends up declining, as he's not interested in forming a team with somebody else. He's just not interested in that stuff, so he politely declines, so Professor Oak isn't going to bother him anymore about it. We then get the scene where Ash reunites with his Pokemon at Oak's lab, starting with Charizard and Bulbasaur. Then more Pokemon show up. And then he eventually reunites with his Tauros, which, of course, they run him over. And he's caught by Muck. Now, while I love this scene, I did notice that there were a couple Pokemon that were missing. Probably the most prominent one I noticed missing was Sceptile. Where the heck is Sceptile? Why didn't Sceptile make an appearance here? Like, Corphish is here, but I don't see Sceptile. Where exactly did this Pokemon go? But besides that, nice scene. Now, while Ash is visiting his Pokemon, Professor Oak mentions to Ash that he actually hasn't seen his Infernape in a couple days. In fact, him and Tracey tried looking for Infernape, and they haven't seen him in a couple days, which I thought was pretty interesting. So I guess Tracey is confirmed still alive and not dead in the Pokemon universe. They're still ignoring him, but I guess at least they acknowledge that he still exists. He didn't totally disappear after all this time, so cool. It would have been nice to see him in this episode, but whatever. At least he's still alive. But anyways, turns out that Infernape has been fighting. He started fighting Charizard, then he went ahead and fought Ash's other fire types that are at Professor Oak's lab before taking off. And Infernape is just fighting fire types and has disappeared for a couple days. So Ash and Go decide to look for Infernape. So as Ash and Go are searching for Infernape, Go decides to be Go, and he tries to capture a Pidgeotto and an Onix, Pokemon Go style. Because Go just can't help himself sometimes. Luckily, both attempts fail, and Onix over here is pretty upset and is about ready to attack Ash and Go, and that's when both boys are saved by a Blastoise using Hydro Pump. And that's when they find out that this Blastoise's trainer is none other than Gary Oak. Yes, that Gary Oak. And this whole scene was really nice with Ash and Gary catching up. It was really cool to see. And Ash introduces Go to Gary. And I think their interactions were what I was exactly expecting them to be, with Gary being pretty cocky and pretty much being upfront with Go basically saying, hey, if you're going to be hanging around with Ash, you should be a very skilled and competent trainer just like him. So Gary's being Gary, and I'm all for it. When I made my video a while back about the top 5 characters I want to see in Journey's return, Gary Oak was number 1, and I wanted to see him clash with Go. And we got just that in this episode, and it was fantastic. Now, I like how it's revealed here that Gary has left Sinnoh and is basically traveling around the world. Kind of like Ash is doing, which I think is really cool, and I like what they're doing with Gary in this episode. But anyways, Gary reveals that the reason why he's back in Kanto is because Moltres was spotted in a valley nearby. And he actually asks Ash, hey, why are you out here? You asked me why I'm here? Why are you back here? And Ash reveals that, hey, my Infernape went missing. It's been gone for a couple days. We're looking for it. And Gary actually thinks that Infernape went to the valley to search for Moltres. Thinking about how Infernape was facing off against Ash's fire-type Pokemon at Oak's lab. So maybe Infernape wanted to face off against Moltres as well. Now I want to mention really quickly that I like a lot of the callbacks that this episode has been doing. We have callbacks to Ash in his Sinnoh outfit. We have callbacks to Chimchar and fully evolving into Infernape. We even get a reference to Ash facing off against Paul in the Sinnoh League. That was awesome. That was really awesome, and I hope this is an indication that Paul is going to be returning at some point in the future, because that would be amazing. But anyways, moving on, Gary, Ash, and Go head off to the valley to find Moltres. Now Ash, Go, and Gary arrive at the valley, and this valley was said to have been formed by a volcanic eruption. But the interesting thing here is the reason why Gary thinks that Moltres is going to appear here is because wherever Moltres appears, it's basically an indication that spring has arrived. And as you can tell, this area is blooming, so spring has arrived in this area. And not only that, Infernape is actually here, and Gary theorizes that the reason why Infernape was fighting all the fire type at Oak's lab was because Infernape wanted to face off against Moltres and came out here seeking to face off against Moltres. And that's when Ash and Infernape are reunited, which was a very nice scene. And then shortly afterwards, Infernape's wish comes true as Moltres appears. Now, Infernape is the first one to face off against Moltres here. And it does an alright job. I like how it uses Dig to get away from Moltres' fire spin. It manages to land one flamethrower on Moltres, but unfortunately, Moltres pretty much defeats it. Although it still wants to fight, it actually doesn't participate any further after this. That's when Gary uses Blastoise, which Gary does a pretty good job against Moltres, and he has a type advantage, but Blastoise is eventually defeated. And that's when Go uses Cinderace, and Cinderace attempts to use Pyro Ball on Moltres, which it dodges. It's about to attack Cinderace, and that's when Gary brings out Electivire, and Ash uses Pikachu, and they basically block the attack coming at Cinderace, and they end up hitting Moltres with a very powerful, electric move combination, which it does some damage, but Moltres eventually flies away, but it leaves behind one of its feathers, which Gary actually needs for something. Now, an interesting thing here is that a Corviknight shows up out of nowhere. As it turns out, Gary called this Pokemon and gave his Moltres feather to this Pokemon, which flew off somewhere. Where did it go to? Probably back to Galar, I guess. It's definitely flying a long way. But anyways, they head back to Oak's lab, and Infernape is seemingly satisfied after facing off against Moltres. Gary over here is talking to somebody, and it's revealed to be that blue-haired girl from Project Mew in the teaser. Yeah, as it turns out, Gary is actually participating in Project Mew. And as part of Project Mew, you basically have to go through a bunch of trials, or a trial, in order to gain access to Project Mew. So it turns out that Gary's trial was to retrieve a Moltres feather and send it off. And he gets a token prize or something. It's just something as part of the project. There'll probably be a little bit more revealed about that in the future. But Gary over here actually hears that Go declined joining Project Mew. And he tells Go that, yeah, that makes sense. You're a pretty weak trainer. You probably shouldn't do it. Anyways, I'm taking off. Smell you later, losers. But Professor Oak actually mentions Go later on that this was probably Gary's way of basically encouraging you to join Project Mew. And after hearing all that, Go actually decides to join Project Mew. Even though he declined it earlier, he's been inspired as a result of, talking with Gary and seeing, the way he, talked down to him. It basically motivated Go to join Project Mew and prove Gary wrong and actually beat him. So I guess this makes Go a rival to Gary now as part of the project. Interesting. So yeah, the episode pretty much comes to an end here with Go and Ash joining Project Mew. So overall, I thought this was a great episode. I had a blast watching it, and while I do have some issues with the episode, that doesn't take away from the good things that we got in this episode. So first off, I like the continuity throughout the episode. We had flashbacks to the first episode with Gary and his cheerleaders, which was pretty nice. We had Ash in his Sinnoh outfit, and that flashback to Ash versus Paul. I am still blown away by that one, by the way. So, let's pray that Paul returns soon. But yeah, it was nice to see some of Ash's old Pokemon at the lab. Pretty cool, especially his Kalos Pokemon. Nice. Let's hope that he uses them again someday, later down the road. Also, Tracey, confirmed to be alive and well, is cool as well. Now, the next thing I liked in this episode was Gary frickin' Oak. Absolutely loved him in this episode. I miss this guy. It was great to see him again. And I love how he was portrayed throughout the episode. It shows that while he has matured and has become a lot more friendly since the early days of the series, he still retains a bit of his cocky attitude, especially when he's talking with Go. And I love their interaction in this episode. This is exactly what I wanted to see in an interaction between these two. This episode absolutely nailed it, in my opinion. And it was just so enjoyable watching these two interact and just Go, getting so angry and, upset with Gary and actually becoming jealous of Ash and Gary's friendship or friendly rivalry, whatever you want to call it. But I don't know, I thought it was all really nice. But the thing about it is, Gary isn't just being a jerk to Go. He's actually secretly pushing Go. And by pushing Go, Gary is essentially motivating him to work harder towards his goal. And basically be someone that Gary recognizes as not only a strong trainer, a strong person, but even a rival. So yeah, this is great. In my opinion, connecting Gary to Project Mew was a brilliant idea by the writers, because not only does it work towards Gary's goal of him being a Pokemon researcher and traveling all over the world, we have Go and his goal of catching Mew, and it reinforces him. So this works wonderfully, in my opinion. One of the issues I have in Journeys is that I've always felt that Go's goal is just lacking. Like, Ash is a good motivator, but I really feel like there needed to be something else for Go's goal to motivate him to work harder towards his goal. I just haven't seen it in Journeys up to this point, and to see somebody like Gary basically push Go to work harder towards his own goal by joining Project Mew, I think that this is great. This is amazing. Throwing Gary frickin' Oak into the mix was a great idea, in my opinion. Also, since Gary is part of Project Mew, I hope he makes more appearances, from, here to here, from time to time we get to see him. It'd be nice, I don't want him to just make one appearance in the series. Let's, see him, 4, 5, 6 times down the road. It'd be nice. And speaking of Project Mew, I think that this episode did a great job introducing it. I liked how Go, being true to his personality, didn't want to be part of the project, as he is an introvert and he doesn't really like to, team up with others. He doesn't really trust others besides like Ash or Kaharu. So this fits with his personality, which I think is pretty good. But with Gary pushing him, Go now wants to be part of the project and work towards his ultimate goal of catching Mew. I think that this was a great introduction to Project Mew. And I do feel like the next episode should continue this plot line, I overall think that this was a good introduction to it. Now, while I like this episode, I do have 2 issues with it. So, my first issue is that I was a bit disappointed with Infernape's battle with Moltres, as it was definitely too short and it barely fought against Moltres. It only participated for just a little bit before Blastoise basically took over for a while. And that was it. After Pikachu and Electivire basically delivered the final blow on Moltres before it flew away, that was it. Infernape didn't even get a second chance to face off against this Pokemon. It just landed one attack on Moltres that didn't even seem to phase it. And at the end of the episode, it's seemingly satisfied after facing off against Moltres. Are you kidding me? Like, I don't know about you guys, but this definitely should have been a lot longer, since it was one of the main focuses in this episode that Infernape was gone. It was the whole reason that Ash and Go ran into Gary. They were looking for Infernape, and it wanted to face off against Moltres because it was facing off against a bunch of fire types at Oak's lab. And it only, fought it for, not even a minute? and it's satisfied after that. I don't know about you guys, but I find that to be a bit disappointing. And this goes into issue number 2, Ash's Pokemon at the lab. While it was nice to see them, they were barely in the episode. Like, it felt like they needed to quickly acknowledge them and then move on. Like, Ash sees Bulbasaur, Charizard, sees a bunch of his other Pokemon, and then, sees Muck, sees his Tauros, hangs out with them for a little bit, and then they're off to find Infernape. And then he sees them for a little bit at the end of the episode. The end. I don't know about you guys, but I was kind of a bit disappointed there, and I wanted to spend more time with these Pokemon, as we haven't seen some of them in a long time. And not only that, some of them didn't even appear at all in the episode, like Sceptile, for example. Like, really? Now, I will say that this was handled a bit better than the Sun and Moon episode, where it primarily focused on Kanto Pokemon at the lab. I will say that. But still, I really felt like there could have been more focus on some of these Pokemon. It's just my opinion. Hopefully we'll come back later down the road, but in regards to this episode, it just left a lot to be desired. And this leads me to believe that, much like with a lot of other episodes and journeys, this would have greatly benefited from being expanded into a 2-episode arc. Like, have one episode focusing on the reunion at Oak's lab with all of Ash's Pokemon, seeing every single one of them, not excluding a few of them. We see all of Ash's Pokemon that are currently at the lab. And then, partway through the episode, we reunite with Gary, we find Infernape, and then the episode ends up with a cliffhanger where Ash, Go, and Gary encounter Moltres at the valley. Then we have episode 2, which a good portion of the episode is the battle between, Ash, Go, and Gary versus Moltres, with Infernape basically being the main player in this battle, like the MVP out of all of the Pokemon that are facing off against Moltres. We can have Blastoise, Pikachu, Electivire, Cinderace, all these Pokemon contribute to the battle, but make Infernape the MVP, maybe deliver the final blow, and then Moltres takes off and drops its feather. And then you end the episode off with Ash spending a little bit more time with his Pokemon at the lab before bidding farewell, and maybe hype up Project Mew a little bit more. And then you'd have pretty much a perfect 2-episode arc. So yeah, once again, the episodic nature of Journeys is basically holding it back from its fullest potential. Like, imagine if you got a 2-episode arc with this, with what I just described. It would just be amazing, and it would satisfy pretty much everybody. But we had to make it a single episode where we had to cram everything into one episode. And, it is what it is. It's still a great episode. But split this into 2 episodes, and I think it would have been, 10 times better. Now, that's all I got for this episode review, and I have to apologize for taking a long time in this review. But when you have an episode like this, where you have an old character like Gary returning and all of Ash's Pokemon returning, there's a lot you want to talk about. So, understandably, there's a lot I had to say for this episode. But I overall enjoyed this episode. On Twitter, I gave this episode a 9 out of 10. But after kind of thinking things over, I'd say this episode is maybe like an 8.5 out of 10. It's still a very solid episode, don't get me wrong. I just feel like if they would have expanded it into a 2-episode arc, this would have been a 10 out of 10. Both episodes would have been a 10 out of 10. Just amazing stuff. But, for what we got, it was still a great episode. So, guys in the comment section down below, what'd you think of this episode? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Post your thoughts in the comment section down below. If you're new to the channel, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And I'll see you guys later.